them and repeating them. So the Newland-Lincoln axis is really driving foreign policy. In the meantime, you've got people behind the scenes that are saying, our economy is extremely fragile. Even Mohammed El Aryan, who's a pretty sharp individual in my judgment when it comes to economics, he said publicly, you know, 100-point increase in the interest rates, just a 1% increase in interest rates, could send the American economy into a deep recession or worse. Well, gosh, I wonder where we're headed at this point. We're looking at this supposed world enraged by Russia's behavior, only to discover that the entire peninsular Arab contingent is now sitting down to do business with China, putting the petrodollar at severe risk. India has joined with China and refused under any circumstances to condemn the Russians for what they are doing. Don't get a peep out of Africa or Latin America by any means. So where does this leave you? It leaves you with the Europeans and the North Americans. But what are the Europeans really saying? Well, the Germans announced that they couldn't possibly support sanctions on oil and gas under any conditions, or they risk unemployment on a grand scale, throwing hundreds of thousands of people out of work, perhaps poverty, or what they won't admit publicly are mass discontent and riots in the streets because people can't work, they can't live. We forget petroleum is part of so much of our society. To dismiss it out of hand as evil because it's carbon-based is an impossibility. No one in Europe is happy about this. All of the Europeans want this to end. We're the ones who are driving this train and saying, we must win in Ukraine. This is an existential fight for us. No, it's not. It is an existential fight for Russia. Russia has a vital strategic interest in Ukraine. We don't.
We don't.
But we're driving it very hard. So who is behind it? Because the thing that's so striking to me is that we go from the global threat of the global caliphate to suddenly China is an existential threat to everyone, to now Putin, the archdeacon of all evil, is the principal threat who must be destroyed. These things happen so rapidly, and the Congress is almost universally unified in its thinking about this. Who is in charge? I don't think Biden thought this up. I really don't. This doesn't track with Joe Biden over his lifetime. And Joe Biden, to his credit, has said no troops on the ground in Ukraine, no fly zone, no MiGs flying from a NATO country, whether they've got Ukrainians or anybody else in them. So he's still somewhat in touch with reality. So where does all of this come from?
I think it comes from where General Dwight D. Eisenhower, five-star general, supreme commander of the Allied forces, and two-term president, in his January 1961 farewell address, warns the American people that the military-industrial complex is robbing the nation of the genius of the scientists, the sweat of the laborers, and the future of the children. Look what you talked about Biden today. He just another $800 million of our dollars going to Ukraine. They just spent another $13.6 billion to go to Ukraine after $1.6 billion had already been sent there, as our roads and rotten infrastructure, 61% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, and they keep building up the war talk and building up the military-industrial complex.
And what is this government in Ukraine?
Yeah.
We don't have much evidence that this man Zelensky really controls anything that's happening on the ground in Ukraine. His forces are out there operating independently. When the war began, Ukrainian commanders complained they had no orders. They acted independently, doing whatever they thought they were supposed to do. This is one of the most corrupt places in the world.
Yep.
Where is all of this money going?
Yep.
This is insane. And then no one bothers to note that vast quantities of the weapons that we've been sending over to Ukraine are already sitting under control of the Russians. They've captured it.
Wow. You know,
now,
you were talking before.
I don't know, but I know they've captured lots of our javelins, and I suspect they've captured a lot of other things.
You know, you were talking about Europe's neutrality. In one way, yes, but another way, no. I mean, we just saw that, Germany's buying F-35s, and they've just increased their defense budget by a big number, and they're all building more and more military.
Yeah, but
You
the
know, and
problem in Germany and the problem in much of Europe is that to build an effective military establishment really takes a decade. So they're a long way from
oh,
fielding anything.
you
So
know,
it's all symbolic to satisfy us.
yeah,
On the one hand, no, we're going to buy oil and gas from the Russians, and the Russians are going to continue to profit from this, and we're sorry about that, but we need it. We have to do it. So what we'll do is we'll buy F-35s,
ah,
and that is to compensate you for the damage we're inflicting on your sanctions regime.
uh, you know, you talked about Zelensky and him not leading. This is a guy, and you can't make this up, as you well know. Before he became president of Ukraine, he played as a comedian the president of Ukraine. And now we got the comedian who played the president of Ukraine becoming the president. So, I mean, he's a brilliant guy, obviously, and very strategically, schooled. So he's right on top of running the military.
Well, his principal mission is to entertain the West. He seems to be doing a marvelous job of that.
That's right. He's doing it. Well put. You talked about Blinken not knowing anything about anything. Oh, by the way, this is the Blinken, by the way, that Obama sent over to Yemen when the Saudis launched the war against the Houthis from Washington, D.C. back in March of 2015. And Blinken was sent there to give them, quote, intelligence as the United States is refueling the Saudi jets to bomb and create the worst humanitarian crisis on earth over there in Yemen. But beyond Blinken, they say that U.S. Army General Ben Hodges has predicted Russian forces will be unable to continue their assault on Ukraine 10 days from now.
Well, he obviously has intelligence and information the rest of us don't.
And he should know because, they did it with this guy in Iraq or was he in Afghanistan?
Well, I'm not sure service there is going to confer any great wisdom on any senior officer. Everything there was in a counterinsurgency environment against an enemy without armies, without air forces, without air defenses, without a real economy, without a real government. It's hard to draw on that to understand anything happening on the ground in Ukraine.
Yeah.
He was the three-star who commanded, quote unquote, U.S. Army Europe, which the Army wants to upgrade one more time to another four-star. Remember, we have right now 44 four-stars on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces. And at the height of World War II in 1943-44, when we had 12.2 million men in uniform, we only had 7 four-stars.
Wow. Well, it's a
It
bureaucracy.
makes you wonder how they could have possibly been successful at all with only 7 four-stars.
Yeah. It's a bureaucracy. That's all it is. I mean, that's all it is. And then we have this other guy, Francis Fukuyama.
Oh, Fukuyama, yes. Yeah.
And he said Russia faces outright defeat and sudden collapse in Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, he has to say that because he's been predicting